And since we're bringing up offensive rating, 128.3 for the Pacers when Tyrese Haliburton is on the floor.
That
That is,
that is that's the highest number I can ever recall seeing over like a month of basketball for any player.
we could transition from the number 2 offense in the NBA to the numero uno offense in the NBA, and that's the Indiana Pacers. You want to give their
Can
stats?
you yeah, actually here, I'll do it since you did the bulk of the work on them. I want to start with this. 123.9 offensive rating so far this season. Recall that usually offense starts off lower. Now, sure, smaller sample, you have some outliers. But Indiana right now, you remember that number for Atlanta, 121.2? Indiana is 2.7 points per 100 better than that. How are they doing it? They're shooting the shit out of the ball. Number 1 in field goal. But they also, despite how much they run, are only turning it over on 12.8% of their possessions. That's third in the league. And they, for a small team, they actually get a decent number of offensive rebounds. But I mean, the biggest thing is just that they are shooting incredibly well. The defense, we don't need to talk about that. They're 29th, but they're still plus 2.1 net rating. We're going to see them in the in-season tournament quarterfinals. They are projected to tie for the 9th seed, 44 and 38, 60% chance of the playoffs. And the big reason why, of course, they have the best offense in NBA history and the best offense in the league by 2.7 points per 100, Tyrese Haliburton.
Yes, and since we're bringing up offensive rating, 128.3 for the Pacers when Tyrese Haliburton is on the floor.
That's the highest number I can ever recall seeing over like a month of basketball for any player.
I can't recall, and especially for a guy who's driving that offense. And a totally respectable, roughly a 114 when he sits. Like that 114 when he sits is still around league average, which in many ways is more stunning. Just on the idea of like when you think about who is, even with some of the injuries they've had, who is on and off the floor for the Pacers. But what I wanted to look at, because and unfortunately there wasn't a perfect way to do this, so I'm going to go through a couple different avenues of Tyrese Haliburton's the frequency and the difficulty of the shots that he's making is something that's very like it's almost unprecedented in the league. And of course, it's important to note there's a big difference between doing so over 15 games than over 82. So when we get into, and I always caution this, and they're like, oh, nobody's ever averaged 25, 20, and 2. And then you're like, yeah, well, the reason why is because you're doing it over 15 games and not over a full season. But I wanted to get into some of the nitty gritty on it. And there isn't a great database for like self-created threes or anything quite like that. So I did a couple different pathways for it. Tyrese Haliburton taking just under 7 pull-up threes per game, defined as the NBA does it. This is on their official stats. And making just under 43% of those. And he's shooting almost 55% on his catch and shoot threes, which are far fewer. Last year, only 3 players took 6 or more pull-up threes per game. And Curry was the only player who made even better than 37%. Curry made 45%. So Haliburton, this is an unprecedented territory. And it's worth noting that Luka Doncic is around at his level as well. But in the history of the NBA, at least, so the NBA's database goes back to 2013, the like kind of tracking data pull-up shot database. And I think it's fair to argue that no one was taking enough pull-up threes before that to make the list. Maybe I don't even think during the time when the line was closer. So the first player to ever do that, 6 pull-up threes per game, was Stephen Curry in 15-16, his unanimous MVP season. Since then, it has happened a total of 21 times over full seasons. Only 4 of those 21 times did the player make 40% of those threes or better. Curry did it 3 times, Damian Lillard did it once. So Haliburton, if he can get even close to that, we're in unprecedented or close to unprecedented, basically unprecedented for non-Steph Curry history. And if we're getting into, like I started with some basketball reference stuff, and it's like, there aren't that many players who have the distribution responsibilities that Haliburton does and shoot this kind of volume and success on threes. So the basic premise that I wanted to kind of get to is that we don't know where the rest of the season is going, But something to monitor here. Tyrese Haliburton is in the early stages of what could continue to be the best non-Curry high volume 3 season by a player who has this kind of role within their offense. Like it's the competitor is probably Lillard in 1920, but this is rarefied air.
Yeah, I mean, he is. I think we're going to have to acknowledge at this point, in addition to just how good of a passer he is, that this guy is basically up there with Lillard, Curry, and Steve Nash as like the best shooting point guard ever, right? I mean, I can't really bring anyone else to mind of just who is now. Lillard's a little bit different. Like he's a little more volume than like the crazy efficiency that Nash and Curry had. Nash didn't have the same volume necessarily as these guys, but yeah, the number that he's creating, and I mean that third quarter when he put up the 25 points against the Hawks was kind of his tour de force so far this season in just his ability to generate shots off the dribble. And for those, right, I mean, you remember what his statistical profile was, I think, as a freshman, even as a sophomore, his usage was so low. And you're like this guy, he's going to be like, crossing over, like stepping back, hitting threes. Like that is just, like, we knew that he had pretty good numbers. I thought maybe the way that he would be a good scorer was like coming off of screens off the ball, because I did believe in him as a shooter. But he's improved his handle so much. And because, I mean, there were times like in college where he would get pressured up and like couldn't even get the ball over half court very well. And I mean, he is just an incredible improvement story. And the fact that he got sent somewhere where he is just like get to the ball like this all the time is amazing. But this is just shockingly good shooting from him.
It is. And one of the ways that I want to phrase this is if Haliburton regresses to the mean to his career average as a 41% shooter, though acknowledging when you're on a high volume like this relative to even where he was before, the quality of shot should diminish more. But let's say he gets to that career average. He's at 45% now. Let's say he gets to 41. That would arguably be the greatest high volume 3-point shooting season of all time that isn't Stephen Curry. So he can do worse the rest of the way and still have that line. And that's truly incredible.